All right, guys. Now let's just get into the drawing trend lines correctly. Okay, there's a lot of things to. Well, there's not too many things to drawing trend lines correctly, but there's just a few techniques that you need to be aware of. And once you understand how to draw your trend lines correctly, that's a great time to be putting into play or bringing into play some of the probability enhancers. And Leonard was just discussing there the Fibonacci's, overlaying the Fibonacci's on your charts. At specific times, the Fibos can provide good opportunities, especially when they line up with the trend lines, right? But we'll come into that as we get going. But what I want to do is just run through like the full analysis of an instrument, right? And like today, let me just move that video thing away. Okay, so one thing I'm looking at today is we've got US retail sales figures out, right? And I can see a really good opportunity here. Actually, I'll tell you what, dollar CAD is starting to creep down here. On euro, I was going to say, and dollar CAD, right? With oil at 80 bucks, I could see a downward move here on oil. I mean, on dollar CAD, and it looks like it's starting to drift. So we'll just keep an eye on that as we go through this webinar. Euro, okay, it's a little bit further away, gives us a better opportunity to get set. Now, what you want to be doing is fully analyzing that instrument, okay, euro, to fit the picture here. Now, let me just see what's going on with my charts. Okay, so let's just come over here to the euro. We'll take it into the main euro there because it's for some reason. Let me just see if I can get that chart back up. Oh, cancel. That one just doesn't want to dance. Don't save. Okay. Well, I was just going to say, like, just coming into the instruments. Let me just come back to that starting point, right? Once you isolate an instrument that has got a good setup, you want to really come in and analyze it in detail, right? Because if we're looking at a trade on euro, then what you want to do is check out the euro as well as the euro crosses, but then really come in and analyze the the major, which is obviously against the dollar, and then look at the crosses as well. And there's a bit of a like simple technique here. Now, I've just got the euro up here. I'm just isolating euro itself as opposed to looking at the global sort of majors. On this page, there's a couple of different aspects, right? I've got the bond prices down the bottom here, and also I can change that over to the news. Now, this is more of a fundamental aspect. When we're talking about technicals, we're talking about, the chart, where it's been, what it's doing, and where it's going, right? And the easiest way to start doing your analysis, right? And I've got euro up here on the hourly and the daily perspective, okay, is start with the longer term. Like, see what the trends are doing, because then you start longer term, then you come back to the hourly charts. So here's my euro chart. Now, depending on what version of Metastock you've got, you can just want to shrink up the data. Now, what we want to do when you come to the longer term charts, and the reason why we do the longer term ones is because we can get a lot more data on the screen and go back a lot further to find the long-term trend lines. Now, if I just wind back euro here, okay, so I can see a distinct top up here. All I'm looking for are the highs and lows, right? And going back from where we are here in 2024, even back to 2004, right? So we're going back 20 years. I can see the high up here and the low over here. These are my starting points for drawing trend lines. Okay, now what I want to do is just start drawing the trend lines, okay, as you will. Now, with this much data sort of congested into one spot, it can sometimes be a little bit harder to isolate the spot. So you can just wind it out a touch. Or the other thing you can do, if you're having a bit of trouble there, is just get the magnifier, right, and put it on the chart and then zoom out. It's like zoom in to do it, zoom out, and then you've got the trend line there, right? So if I shrink up the data once again, I can start to see, yep, I've got a trend line here on the top side. Okay, starts up here around 160, the figure. I remember when it was up there, it was like mental. And then you've come down to this point here, which is our most recent point. You can see the trend line progression as it would have followed these highs. And what all we're doing is we're not trying to second guess anything. We're just looking objectively. What was the high? There's a sort of second touch there, third, but you've got all these other sort of history in there. And then you can start to piece it together, and we'll come back down. Now I've got those lines done. I can see the low here. Here's that high point. And from here, you're starting to sort of drill into, okay, so that's our main trend line, right? And then looking at, okay, let's get the next one up. And you just want to see the more, I would draw all the trend lines you can see, and then you can work out whether they're good or bad or not. Now, this one at the top here, I'd say it's a long-term trend line. It's sort of like the only one we've got. So I'm just going to change that. So I like to have a different color, because when I come back and look at my charts, right, if I come back like tomorrow or the next day and I see a green trend line, I know it's the last line of resistance if it's on the top side, or last line of support if it's on the downside. So that tells me that's a big level to be focusing on, right? This one, from this high here, which is sort of May, June in 2021, comes to this point. Well, that's more of like a current level. Doesn't mean it's less significant, but it is sort of the most relevant trend line for us. Now on the downside, right, I've got this trend line, this low down the bottom here. Okay, really to this point here. Now, that isn't necessarily the last line of support, but it is sort of the most relevant level. And you can sort of see here what's been happening on Euro is it's just been sort of gliding to the downside. We've had a bit of a clean out to the downside here. I just blow that up. And this is what I talk about as far as the barroom brawl. We've had a snap down through this level, and now it's sort of just coming back into the range, right? So one of the keys to technical analysis is knowing when to leave trend lines there. Now, this is one of those ones where, you know what, you could be drawing the new support trend line because it has bounced back into the range. In that regard, I would draw the new trend line to this level, but it's got less credibility, right? Because it's just using this current low. It's only got 2 touches. So you can potentially just leave these 2 there, right? This is the old resistance line. And you know what? I talk about this in the courses, get your own sort of color coding up. And it might be, well, that's a bit hard to see, a little bit blue, I was going to say, but you might have a different color there just to show you exactly what that sort of key level was that sort of broke through. Now, is that relevant or not? Well, maybe not. And that's why we've drawn this trend line below. Okay. All we wanted to see was what was the price action around here. You can see it clean out the stops and it's back in the range. Okay. So that might be enough for you to go, yeah, righto, I can see that. So what I'm going to do is just delete that, because you can analyze it and then come back and have a look, right? And on the daily charts, once again, at the top, draw the trend lines and then assess their credibility. And when I'm talking about credibility, I'm talking about we are trying to find out what everyone else is looking at. And when I say everyone else, the professional traders. Because if we know what they're looking at, we know where the orders are for the banks, where the stop losses and the take profits are and these sorts of things. And then you can get a better perspective of what critical levels there are and which ones are sort of, will trigger a shift in momentum or direction. And that's sort of what we're trying to isolate. So on the daily chart there, if I wind that back out, okay, you can get a good idea of that's the daily chart analyzed. Okay. Now, just going over that, you find the highs, you find the lows, you start drawing trend lines, support and resistance trend lines, and that will show you exactly where they are. Now, not all the trend lines, I've given them different weighting by drawing different colors. The real long-term level there is green. I've got my current trend line, which is extremely valuable, is the red one. And the ones that are sort of in play short, well, not really short term, this is a daily trend line, are the orange ones. And their levels I will keep an eye on as we go forward. Okay, so that structure is what you do every time you draw trend lines. Okay, and it's not, this doesn't change for the hourly chart. So now I've drawn the daily charts there, the daily trend lines, and it's good to have these things side by side, because once you've finished analyzing the dailies and then you come back to the hourlies, then you can sort of start to put into perspective what's happening on the hourly charts. Is it going up or down? And what's happening here on the sort of longer term perspective on the daily charts. Okay, so once again, same principle applies when you're drawing trend lines. Okay, to do this correctly, and I'm using TradingView, right? These guys have switched over to TradingView. My old templates on Metastock use a thing called Flex documents. Some of you may have that. It's actually, I like those charts better, to be honest, because when you use TradingView, it takes time for it to load the data. It just sort of bugs me. But it's the same principle. What we're trying to do is get as much data in here as possible. And when you are looking at the charts on an hourly perspective, there's only a certain amount of data that will come up, right? It's the number of like bars on here, right? So at this point here, okay, I've gone back, it looks like as far as I can, and I've got a high here and a low to work with. These are the two starting points for me drawing trend lines. Okay, now, once again, once I've isolated those, I can sort of just widen it out a touch to try and make it easier to nail these trend lines. Okay, so I'll just get close. Now, I always start with the red trend line, and then I'll come back and assess it. Now, this one up here is not on the point. To make it easier, I'll zoom in, just grab the level, stick it on to the top. I'll zoom back out. Okay, and then I've got that trend line on the top drawn. Now, I can see very clearly, right? When you do this, you'll see, okay, this is great. I've got two touches here. There are other trend lines here. Now, this is the next highest point and the most relevant. So I would be coming back to get the ray. Once again, it's not going on the right spot. If I widen that out, it will make it easier just to click on. I think there's a level of accuracy with these things. And you know what? Save time. I'll just go in and adjust it manually. And that zoom in, zoom out will save you a bit of frustration trying to isolate the highs here, right? And make sure you're accurate, right? I can see here, it's just not quite right. And the reason for that is, you know, when we were sitting in the desk in the banks, you're sitting there all day. So we were like absolutely 100% correct when we were drawing trend lines, right? That's one of the things that we were, and actually working with Metastock even years ago, when they first developed the software for the charts, we were telling them, make this thing easier for us to use, make it that snap to point feature, so it's quicker for us to draw trend lines. And that was something they worked on. Now, I've got that trend line there, and I'll come back to analyzing the market here at the current levels in a second. But what I want to do is just draw the trend lines on the downside here. And if I just get that on the spot, no, I'll just do it quickly. I can widen that, widen out the scope there. It would be easier to find it, but this is the easiest or quickest way to do it. And once again, I'll just double check my line here. You just sort of sense it wasn't on the right spot. Okay, so I've got the support and resistance levels sort of drawn. Now I'll widen out the chart, okay, to the current market levels. Now, I wouldn't like it. This is what you can be doing, right? I was going to say something else, but let me just come in and draw the trend lines. Okay, now, once again, I want to get that on that point. Okay, so you got two touches here on this trend line on the downside. Now, what I'm doing is I'm drawing all trend lines. Okay, two touches here. That one below has a bit more history involved. Okay, so what I could be doing, I could leave that there. All you're really focusing on is that new low that was formed. And I could change it to orange, which tells me it's the start of a new trend line. Perhaps it comes into play, perhaps it doesn't, right? That's something that we can do. And on the top side, I would go to the point of drawing this next trend line. Okay, that's sort of got 2 touches there as well. And you could be drawing this last one just in here. Okay, and then you've got all the trend lines in play. Now, so some of these trend lines have only got 2 touches. And this one at the top here, you could argue it's had 3 over the course of time. I might come back and go, you know what, this trend line here, it's topped out here, it's a close second there. You could almost count that as one, these 2 touches, but I'll leave it as 3, because once we've had 3 touches on the trend line, it basically confirms the trend line that everyone will be able to see it and they will be sort of focusing on it. So we could be looking at euro here with this setup on an hourly perspective. Okay, and if I put that into play here next to each other and you're analyzing the euro, right? I've drawn my trend lines correctly. Okay, I know that the trend line here, just by looking at it, the color, it's not like a relevant trend line, but it's only had 2 touches. The bankers actually start to trade the 3rd touch, right? They don't wait for the 3rd touch, they trade it, right? That's why I'm drawing these orange trend lines in there, because that will become active once it gets close to the trend line. I can look at that on a daily perspective, and you can sort of see it just banging sideways since, pretty much since 2023. It's had a few flush outs here and there, but generally speaking, it's not breaking down. It's not breaking up at the moment, right? So looking at the hourly, at the daily move, you're like, well, it's not exactly mid-range. It's just coming back off the lows here. But what does it do for me as far as a trading opportunity right now? And I'm looking at US retail sales figures as being a good opportunity to get long euro if that data's weak. Well, I've got a trade here on the hourlies, but it's not exactly breaking through the top trend lines here. So that tells me, okay, we've got a trade in play here, but you know what? It's definitely going to stall it up here at 108. Let me just see what that level is. 108, sort of 73, 70, 75. So we've got a chance to get a trade on here, but it's not a long-term trade where I would add to the position, because I can see on my daily charts, it's still within ranges. So it's not going to like shoot up somewhere. The one thing to keep an eye on is those big levels, 108, the figure, that could perhaps create some sort of, resistance level, being a big round number. But anyway, there's room for it to move up. This could be a potential entry level for us, or actually where the market is right now. If the US retail sales figures came out and they were weak, euro is sort of going up, and I'd probably be looking to trade that outcome, right? And but that's the euro against the dollar. What about if we had euro data coming out? Well, there's one other way. You should be analyzing the euro, okay, against the dollar the same way you would, excuse me, with it against the crosses, right? So it's just a matter of, and doing this, right, you might get feel like, it's a bit boring, it's wasting my time. But this is where you find the nice, easy trades, right? And it's the same thing you're doing that we just did on the euro itself. There's a bit more work to it, but once you've drawn the daily trend lines, then you can come into the hourly trend lines and focus on the crosses where the trend, if there is a trend, lines up with the hourly sort of trade action. So once again, I'll just sort of run through the first couple here just to sort of drill it into you, the process of drawing the trend lines correctly. Okay, so this is Euro Aussie. I'm on the daily chart, right? Easy to find the long-term levels going to the daily chart. Now, if I bring the data across, once again, you can go back as far as you like. Okay, and we'll go back to 2000 and what are we? Late 2008. I've got a high here, and this is the next high. You get a couple of blowouts here on major events, can really screw things up, but still draw the trend lines, right? Doesn't cost you money to draw these trend lines. So if I came into Euro Aussie, okay, you see how that's sort of grabbed the one next to it. It's because I've squished up the data so much there. So if I zoom in and just grab that, take it up, zoom out. I've got the high there. Now you'll get more efficient on this as you go forward. Now on the downside here, we've got a number down the bottom there, or a low, I should say, to this level here. Now, once again, I'll zoom in. And don't forget, like, close enough is not good enough, right? If you're just going, oh, that looks close enough, you're kidding yourself. Because if you draw a trend line from the wrong point on a daily chart going back 10 or 15 years, you could be out by 30 to 50 points at least, right, on getting that right entry level. So make sure you do it properly. When I say properly, accurately. Now, I've drawn the trend lines. Okay, so let's bring it back into perspective. I can see where those big trend lines are. I've got this, the most relevant high here, and I've got the relevant low. And this is where it can get a little bit interesting, right? Because you're like, okay, so I've got a level here, but let's have a look at the current price action. The easiest thing to do is just draw the trend line. Okay, so if I come across and I just draw the trend line, okay, that's the most, you got the starting point and the most relevant high that we have, it's there. Now, the downside isn't as easy because you can see it's just sort of trading sideways and rolling over a bit. And this is where the support trend line can become a little bit convoluted, because all we're doing is, if we draw the trend line on the downside here, you're just drawing it from one point to another. Like initially, once this low was in place, okay, you can see how as soon as that trend line stalls there and bounces, you draw the trend line. And you can see how that trend line was relevant up until this break. You can see the barroom brawl action here, and then it's broken down through that trend line. So from this point here, it's just a matter of, and you do this on your daily chart, it's just a matter of adjusting the trend line to the most relevant point, right? And then once we've drawn that trend line, okay, you can see how this has been flowing. Boom, a little stop loss flush out here on the downside, and then it's back into play. But at that point there, all you're doing once again, and this is why you're not redrawing the trend lines on your daily charts that often, you're more adjusting them to the price action. You can see from this point here, okay, the market would be looking at this quite closely, because it's had a number of touches here. 1, 2, this is the third touch, a little flush out there, and then it's finally sort of broken down through here. Why I'm just trying to explain to you the history of this trend line, because it will become relevant, right? So by the time we get to that point there, okay, and if I just get that right on the point, I'm a stickler for having these things on the right levels. Okay, you can see the history. This is how these trend lines work, right? So it comes up to this key point. It's dancing around the barroom brawl. Doesn't look like an easy trade to sort of get into. It's up and down through the level. Once it's broken through there, we're now on the downside, and the process starts again. We've got to wait for that new low to form, and then we're doing it again. So from this point here, the support trend line is now this level, right? But you can see before, the trend line was closer to these levels, right? So it had a bit more history and credibility. Now this trend line is here. You could almost, like, even on a daily perspective, start to draw this as orange. It's sort of like the only trend line there, but it's not like amazing, because now all we're doing is following these lows. And when it gets to this point, and I've seen a lot of technical analysis around there, this is where there's a lot of services just provide horizontal trend lines. But in this regard, it's probably almost relevant to draw a horizontal line. I like my horizontal lines yellow. Don't ask me why, but that's just what I've used for years. Because when we're drawing that trend line, we are just really focusing on that low, okay? But you can see, and this is why I don't sort of dwell on it too much, because once the price action starts, it's bounced again, right? This is the relevant trend line here, and the horizontal trend line there is not an afterthought, but it's still there, but it's less relevant because the price action's higher. So if you're looking to get in here, you'll be getting in a little bit higher. Now, the reason for me explaining all of these components of the support trend line here is because Euro Aussie is sort of just rolling over. Okay, the pen's just going a bit wonky there. So it's just rolling over. And now we're in a situation where it's rolling down. Do you, and this is a question I get quite often, is okay, so if it's done that, what do I do? Do I just keep moving it to the next low, to the next low, to the next low? Well, you'd just be doing that every day of the week, right? What I would be doing is looking at the level where it sort of broke down significantly and just leaving the trend line there. So I know it's broken down, but it's now trading sideways. To me, right, this is the sort of low where it's sort of bounced from. So that's probably the level I would sort of move the trend line to, and I would just leave it there, right? Otherwise, all you're doing is focusing on the new low for each day, okay? And that's what I'm saying is at that point, when it's just rolling sideways but down, that's when you can be, it's almost like a pivot point, right? Think of it that way. So that's where you can come in and draw your horizontal trend line and go, you know what? I don't really have a support trend line because it's just trading sideways but drifting lower. That becomes potentially your level, right? And like you can see here, like it may not happen all the time, but Euro Aussie is sort of behaving near that level. Now, the technical perspective of the crosses is not as great as the majors because there's less people looking at them, but that's the way I would be doing it. Okay, so that you go through this process all the time, right? So once again, if I just come back to Euro Sterling, right, and Euro Sterling is, it's a bit more of a major. Okay, it's a major cross, put it that way. So it might have a bit more relevance. And if we go back through time, I can see some decent moves here on this sucker. Okay, and this is not a bad, this is probably a better one to look at because we've got a bigger cross section of data, right? Now, let me just go through the exact same process again. You wind it back, get all the relevant lows and highs in here, and then we'll just start drawing trend lines to the next relevant levels until we get close here and we can see where the key levels are, where momentum and direction or the trends come into play, right? So on the downside, once again, just drawing the trend line. I'll get that fixed up in a second. Okay, I'm going to change that to red, make it easy for me to see. Just zoom in, come over here, get my little zoom in function again. Okay, and then zoom out. And the same on the top side. Get up there. Okay, let's make it quick and easy. Okay, zoom out. Okay, so then we've got the basic trend lines, and they are sort of the big long-term levels. So I could make those green. So I know exactly when I come back to those, what I'm looking at. All right, now we can zoom in a bit and work out exactly where the relevant trend lines are. And I knew that would do that. Let me just start that one again. Well, okay, just using the zoom in function. Now I'll change that to red because I know I've got the big level behind. I zoom out. Okay, I can see that level there. And then if I come in here just to find that last level on the top side, it might be a bit of an ADHD thing, like you're sitting in front of the screens for 35 years, you end up sort of getting a little bit too accurate sometimes. But here, there's a line here and it goes across to here, this new low, right? Let me just That's what I'm talking about. I tell you what, we had so much time on our hands. We were always made sure we were accurate. So on the top side, if I wind that out, this is the daily chart. You can see where the trend line is very, very clearly, the long-term trend line. Now, I would draw one here. It's the new sort of trend line coming up. I'll probably change that to orange just to make sure we've got the level right. And then, sorry, if I just come back. And then we're sort of in the same situation as that Euro Aussie, right? Where we had a level, but it's just rolling over a touch. So what I want to do is just get it on the point here. And I can work out where the sort of the point is that I'm looking for, like whether it's a pivot point, where it sort of really broke down and hasn't come back from. Okay. If I'm looking here, and like people keep asking me, oh, the way you talk trend lines doesn't work. It's like, well, mate, go and draw any trend line on any instrument and you'll see. Like this trend line from here, you can see it's trading sideways, barroom brawl here, exactly as it should be. This is almost textbook, okay, where it's broken down. This acts as support, okay, all the way until it's broken. Then it acts as resistance. And you can see exactly how that's working until it's had enough gas to pop through. Then the resistance line comes into play and we're lower, right? So in that regard, I would probably keep the trend line there, but you can see how we've got a bunch of lows here. So I would bring it across to here, get the most relevant low, and that's where you can see where it's snapped down. And to me, that's now that I've drawn the trend lines, I can blow those up. I can see the relevance of the trend lines. That's proper technical analysis for Euro Sterling, right, on a daily perspective. And you would do that, continue to do that on your hourly charts. Okay, so that's the key to drawing trend lines correctly. Just go through the process, make sure you draw the trend lines accurately, get your own color coding so it makes sense to you when you come back to the screens. And that's going to make trading these things or doing your analysis a lot easier to find the key technical levels, where momentum may shift, where to get in, where to get out, and it's really going to improve your trading.